Life inside isolation, prisoners locked away so long they forgot their own names. Like, subscribe, comment, because once you step inside this place, you won't come out the same. The cell was barely wider than the man standing in it. Concrete walls, poured thick and rough, swallowed sound before it could travel. No windows. No color. Just gray layered on gray, broken only by a narrow slot in the steel door where food appeared and disappeared without a word. The light above never turned fully off. It dimmed, but it never went dark. The man inside the cell was called Elias Ward. At least, that's what his files said. Elias had been in isolation for so long that the sound of his own name felt foreign when someone finally said it out loud. He tried repeating it once, quietly, just to hear how it felt in his mouth. The syllables didn't land. They slid away, like water over stone. He stopped trying. Isolation wasn't supposed to last this long. 30 days, maybe 60. That was the policy written in clean language for public eyes. But Elias had been here for years. How many, he couldn't say anymore. Time in isolation didn't move forward. It circled. Meals marked the hours. Silence marked the days. And memory eroded first. When the psychologist finally requested access to the segregation unit, the guards hesitated. Not because the request was unusual, but because it was inconvenient. The unit was buried deep inside the prison, beyond the areas visitors were meant to see. It was quiet there. Too quiet. Dr. Mara Ellison walked the corridor with a clipboard pressed tight against her chest. Each step echoed back at her, distorted, as if the walls themselves were listening. She had testified in court about solitary confinement before. She knew the studies. The data. The warnings. But nothing in the research prepared her for the feeling of this hallway. Cells lined both sides, identical steel doors spaced evenly apart. No names. Only numbers. A guard stopped in front of one door and checked his list. Ward, Elias, he said. Dr. Ellison leaned closer to the narrow window cut into the steel. At first, she thought the cell was empty. Then she noticed movement near the back wall. A man stood there, facing away, his forehead pressed gently against the concrete as if listening to it breathe. "Mr. Ward," she said. He didn't turn around. The guard tapped the door once with his knuckles. The sound rang louder than it should have. Slowly, the man pivoted, movements stiff and uncertain. His eyes squinted against the light from the corridor. He looked older than his file photo. Not aged by years, but by absence. By disuse. Dr. Ellison introduced herself. Asked simple questions. How long had he been there? Did he know the date? Did he feel safe? Elias opened his mouth, then closed it again. His lips moved silently for a moment, as if he were rehearsing words he no longer trusted. "I had a name," he said finally. His voice was thin and used. "I think." The guard shifted uncomfortably. Elias had been placed in isolation after a fight that never went to trial. No one could say who started it. No one could say who finished it. His disciplinary record was vague, padded with phrases like ongoing investigation and pending review. Reviews that never came. Each year, a box was checked to extend his confinement. Administrative necessity. Security concerns. Language that sounded reasonable until it was repeated enough times to erase a person. Dr. Ellison reviewed his medical notes. Headaches. Disorientation. Auditory distortions. Episodes where Elias reported hearing voices calling him by different names. The notes ended abruptly months earlier. "Why did the report stop?" she asked. The guard shrugged. He stopped filing them. Elias sat on the edge of his bunk during the evaluation, hands folded tightly between his knees. He avoided eye contact, staring instead at a faint crack in the floor. He told Dr. Ellison that the walls whispered sometimes. Not voices. Pressure. Like a sound trying to break through. She asked when it started. After I forgot, he said. Forgot what? My face. That night Dr. Ellison couldn't sleep. She reviewed court records, lawsuits filed by former inmates, testimony describing the same symptoms. Memory loss. Identity fragmentation. Hallucinations. Men who came out of isolation unable to hold conversations, unable to tolerate light or sound. The next morning, she returned with a formal recommendation: Elias Ward should be removed from long-term isolation immediately and evaluated in a medical unit. The recommendation was acknowledged, logged, filed, and ignored. Days later, a maintenance worker reported something strange. While checking the plumbing behind the segregation unit, he heard tapping. Not pipes. Rhythm. Deliberate. Morse-like. When guards opened Elias's cell for a routine check, they found the back wall covered in faint scratches. Not tally marks. Letters. Words overlapping each other, carved shallow and desperate. Names. Dozens of them. Some were crossed out. Others circled. Some repeated over and over again, as if Elias had been trying them on, testing which one fit. At the center of the wall, written deeper than the rest, were 4 words that stopped the guards cold. I was someone else. Dr. Ellison was called back immediately. She recognized the danger in that sentence. It wasn't confusion. It was collapse. Elias wasn't losing memory anymore. He was losing self. She demanded an emergency extraction. Threatened to escalate. To testify. To go public. That was when the warden intervened. The warden was calm. Polite. He thanked her for her concern and assured her the situation was under control. He cited security risks. Staffing shortages. Ongoing assessments. He suggested that moving Elias now could do more harm than good. People adapt, the warden said. Some better than others. That afternoon, Dr. Ellison received a notice revoking her access to the segregation unit. Official reason: administrative restructuring. Unofficial message: stop digging. But before she left the facility, a junior guard slipped her something folded into his palm. A photocopy. An old intake form. It wasn't Elias Ward's. It belonged to another inmate. Different name. Same cell number. Dated years earlier. Dr. Ellison's heart sank as she realized what it meant. Elias hadn't just forgotten his name. He had inherited the cell of someone who disappeared. And no one could say where that person went. The file followed Dr. Mara Ellison home like a shadow. She spread the photocopied intake form across her kitchen table and stared at it until the words blurred. Different name. Different birth date. Same cell number. Same segregation unit. The intake date was almost 9 years earlier. The release date field was blank. No transfer. No discharge. No death notification. Just silence. The next morning, Mara returned to the prison unannounced, armed with a court subpoena she had no authority to enforce but every intention to invoke. The front office stalled her with polite smiles and long waits. Phones rang without answers. Emails went unanswered. By the time she reached the segregation wing, her access badge no longer worked. She didn't need it. A corrections lieutenant she recognized from previous evaluations met her at the gate. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from knowing too much and saying too little. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I know, Mara replied. That's why I am. She showed him the intake form. His eyes flicked to the name, then away. He didn't deny it. That inmate was transferred, he said. Where? The lieutenant hesitated. Off the books. That was the phrase she had been dreading. Inside correctional systems, off the books didn't mean illegal. It meant inconvenient. It meant paperwork that never reached public records, decisions buried under administrative language until they vanished into policy. Mara pushed past him before he could stop her. They reached the segregation corridor together, the same cold, narrow hallway where sound died quickly. The cell door where Elias Ward was held stood closed. "Open it," she said. The lieutenant shook his head. "Orders came down last night." "From who?" He didn't answer. Mara felt a tightening in her chest. "If you don't open that door, and something happens to him, it's on you." The lieutenant swiped his card. The door slid open with a low mechanical groan. Elias was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tightly around himself. He didn't look up when the door opened. He didn't react to the sudden rush of sound and light. His lips moved silently. Mara crouched in front of him. "Elias," she said carefully. He blinked. Slowly. "I don't think that's right," he said. She asked him what he remembered. He told her about a man who used to stand where she was standing now. A man who whispered numbers into the wall at night. A man who taught him how to count breaths so he wouldn't disappear when the silence pressed too hard. Mara's blood ran cold. "That man," she asked, "what was his name?" Elias shook his head. "He said names were dangerous. He said they could take them." The lieutenant cleared his throat. "That's enough." Mara stood. "No. It isn't." She demanded Elias be moved to medical observation immediately. The lieutenant said the request would be reviewed. Again. As they exited the unit, Mara noticed something she hadn't before. Several cell doors bore faint scratches around the slot, marks from fingernails scraping metal. Not panic. Persistence. As if someone had been trying, patiently, to make themselves heard. That afternoon, Mara contacted a civil rights attorney who had litigated solitary confinement cases years earlier. She sent copies of the intake form, Elias's evaluation notes, and a written account of their conversation. The attorney responded with one sentence. "We've seen this cell before." The pattern was familiar. Inmates placed in long-term isolation under vague security justifications. Reviews delayed. Transfers undocumented. Names quietly replaced. When one inmate broke beyond repair or died, the cell stayed active. The file didn't close. It recycled. Human containment as a renewable resource. Mara requested a full roster of inmates who had occupied that cell over the past decade. The prison denied the request, citing security concerns. She appealed. They delayed. She escalated. They ignored. Then the evidence started to disappear. Maintenance records for the segregation wing were revised overnight. Old inspection reports vanished from the digital archive. Surveillance footage from the corridor was flagged as corrupted. The intake form she had copied no longer existed in the system. Someone had noticed. The junior guard who had slipped her the photocopy stopped showing up for work. His phone went straight to voicemail. When Mara asked about him, she was told he'd transferred facilities. No forwarding information provided. Mara documented everything. Dates. Names. Non-answers. She prepared to testify if necessary, to put her career on the line if that's what it took. She had done this work long enough to know when a system was protecting itself instead of the people inside it. That night, she received an email from an address she didn't recognize. "He's not the first." Attached was a spreadsheet. Redacted, but readable enough. Cell numbers. Dates. Behavioral notes. Several entries were marked identity confusion or withdrawn. One column was labeled status. Too many entries read the same. Unknown. Mara went back to Elias the next morning with renewed urgency. This time, the door didn't open. "He's been moved," the officer at the desk said. "To medical?" Mara asked. The officer shook his head. "Administrative transfer." Her heart dropped. "Where?" "Not listed." Mara demanded confirmation. "Paperwork. Anything." The officer handed her a single-page notice stamped with official seals. The language was clinical. Neutral. Inmate relocated for operational reasons. No destination. No timeline. No authorization signature. Elias Ward had vanished. Mara felt the same hollow chill she had felt reading the intake form the night before. The same sense of stepping into a space where people didn't just disappear physically, but bureaucratically. She drove straight to the courthouse and filed an emergency motion. She contacted journalists, advocacy groups, anyone who would listen. But the system moved faster. By evening, the prison released a statement confirming that Elias Ward had never been held in long-term isolation. Records showed a brief administrative placement followed by a lawful transfer. They said Dr. Ellison was mistaken. They said the cell had always been empty. Mara stood in her office long after dark, staring at the blank wall where she had pinned her evidence. One by one, the documents were being invalidated, reclassified, erased. Except for one thing. In her notebook, written in Elias's shaky hand during their final meeting, were 6 words he had insisted she copy down exactly. Don't let them rename me. Mara closed the notebook slowly. Because now she understood the real danger. Isolation wasn't just destroying minds. It was deleting people. Elias Ward did not exist anymore. At least, that's what the paperwork said. The emergency motion Dr. Mara Ellison filed stalled in procedural limbo. Jurisdictional questions were raised. Deadlines were extended. The prison's legal team submitted affidavits stating that no inmate by that name was currently housed in segregation, or anywhere else under their authority. The language was careful, almost elegant. It didn't deny that someone had been there. It denied that Elias Ward had ever mattered. Mara refused to let the trail go cold. She reconstructed it from the margins, maintenance logs saved as screenshots, archived emails pulled from old litigation, testimony transcripts from lawsuits settled quietly years earlier. The pattern emerged with terrifying clarity. Long-term isolation wasn't just punishment, it was a place where identities dissolved. Where oversight thinned. Where records could be reshaped without resistance. Cells didn't hold men. They held time. Mara finally found a break through a retired clerk who had worked intake during the early years of the segregation unit. The woman spoke cautiously, voice low, as if the walls could still hear her. We reused numbers, she said. Cells, files, sometimes names. It was easier than opening a new case. What happened to the people who were there before? Mara asked. The clerk paused. They were moved. Or they broke. Or they stopped responding. And then the file stayed open. Mara felt the weight of it settle in her chest. The cell wasn't a place where prisoners were forgotten by accident. It was a place designed to absorb them. A week later, a journalist agreed to run the story, part of it. Carefully worded. Sourced. Defensive. The headline avoided naming the prison, avoided specifics. It spoke of systemic failures and administrative blind spots. It mentioned Elias Ward as an allegation, not a fact. But it was enough. Public attention snapped into focus. Advocacy groups demanded answers. Legislators requested briefings. The prison announced a temporary suspension of long-term isolation placements pending review. Cameras were allowed into areas that had been sealed for years. Too late for Elias. Mara received confirmation through unofficial channels that an inmate matching Elias's description had been transferred to a psychiatric facility hours away, admitted under a different name. By the time she arrived, the staff could neither confirm nor deny his presence. Privacy laws, they said. Mara waited anyway. Late that night, a nurse approached her quietly in the hallway. He keeps asking what day it is, she whispered. And why everyone calls him by different names. Mara's throat tightened. Can I see him? The nurse shook her head. Not unless you're family. Mara slid the notebook across the counter. The page with the 6 words written in trembling ink. Please, she said. Just tell him someone remembers. The nurse took the notebook and disappeared down the hall. Mara never saw Elias again. Months passed. Investigations concluded with recommendations, not consequences. Policy revisions were announced. Time limits imposed. Oversight committees formed. The language of reform flowed freely, but quietly. Carefully. No one admitted that the system had been designed to let this happen. The prison closed the segregation unit for renovations. The cell was repainted. The walls sanded smooth. Nothing remained. Except the effects. Former inmates began coming forward, drawn out by the attention, the safety of numbers. They spoke about losing words, faces, themselves. About learning to think in fragments. About being told their names were no longer necessary. One man testified that when he was finally released, he stood in front of a mirror and couldn't recognize the person staring back. "I knew he was supposed to be me," he said. "I just didn't feel it." Mara presented her findings at a national conference. She spoke plainly. About Elias. About the intake form. About the recycled files and the open-ended statuses marked unknown. She warned that isolation didn't just damage the mind. It erased accountability. After her talk, a young researcher approached her with a question that lingered long after. "How many Elias wards are there?" Mara didn't have an answer. Years later, a policy report cited reduced use of long-term isolation. The numbers looked promising. Progress, the report said. Improvement. Buried in the appendix was a footnote, an increase in transfers to psychiatric facilities, often without clear intake histories. The names were different. The pattern was the same. Mara kept Elias's notebook locked in her desk. She never published the page with his handwriting. It felt wrong to turn his last intact thought into evidence. Sometimes, late at night, she would open it and read the words again. "Don't let them rename me." She wondered if he ever remembered who he was. Or if remembering had become too painful to survive. The prison moved on. The system adjusted. The cell found new purposes. And somewhere, behind reinforced doors and soft lighting meant to soothe, a man answered to a name he didn't recognize, feeling certain only of one thing, that once, long ago, he had been someone else. If this story unsettled you, it should have. Because isolation doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like procedure. And when procedure goes unquestioned, people don't just disappear from rooms. They disappear from memory. And if you're not ready to forget them, you already know what to do next.